Hello, everyone. So the fifth participant in this discussion will join us in real time. And I'm happy to see you here and see so many people that are interested in what's going to happen with DeFi after regulation comes, or what's going to happen with regulation with DeFi in the picture. And I'm really happy to have this amazing panel here. And my name is Viara, and I'm part of the European Crypto Initiative. We are an advocacy group based in Brussels, working quite a lot on crypto regulation on an EU level, including DeFi, unfortunately or not. And I'd like to ask my panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and then we can start with the real discussion.
Oh, hello, everyone. I'm Kleczewski. I'm a senior legal counsel in Switzerland at a law firm. I'm also co-chairing the AML compliance working group of the Crypto Valley Association. A lot of things to say about DeFi and AML. I used to practice in Belgium, so everything that's EU regulations and MiCA are of a big interest to me, not only because of their consequences on Switzerland. And I advise mostly DeFi projects, so like even higher interest in the topic today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invite. I'm Mark Ziller. I'm the founder of the Aave Chan initiative. We are the main Aave DAO delegates, and relevant for the discussion today, I'm the head of the DeFi committee of ATAN, the main crypto ecosystem lobby in France. And I guess my discussion today is to explain why the future in France might happen in France.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mona. I have been in DeFi for nearly 7 years. I founded what was known as Melon, today is known as Enzyme. It's the first decentralized asset management protocol. We also were the first to decentralize a DeFi protocol in February 2019. And today I run a development company called Avantgarde, which provides development services to the DAO. Relevant to this discussion, I'm also involved with Multi-Chain Asset Management Association, which has tried hard to shape DeFi regulation in Switzerland, or at least be a representative to that voice, give it a voice.
Thank you all. And Lior, our fifth member, will join us shortly, hopefully. He'll then introduce himself. And so we already mentioned the existing regulations, AML, MiCA, and MiCA, it's a special day for the markets in crypto assets regulation, because today it was published in the official journal of the European Union, meaning that it will become applicable in either 12 or 18 months, depending on which part we're talking about. So with this intro, I would like to ask you to basically share with us, what do you think about the current regulatory landscape, and how does it affect DeFi, in your opinion? And particularly, let's say, let's focus more on MiCA, and especially the part of MiCA that mentions, okay, DeFi is excluded from the scope, but also doesn't mention what is DeFi exactly. So if you can share your thoughts on that, it would be very interesting.
Maybe the lawyer will jump on it with that question. I mean, I gave a talk about MiCA and DeFi yesterday, so I will not go in depth on that. But if I summarize it, is indeed they mention DeFi, but a very particular type of DeFi, fully decentralized, fully disintermediated, and no one really knows what it means, because in practice, and as it was pointed out by a report pointing out what is still like the remaining pain points after MiCA, it's clearly explained that we have a spectrum. And everything that's on the spectrum that's not fully decentralized and fully disintermediated will have no answers for now. And if we cherry pick the various provisions from MiCA and check whether this is compatible with how DeFi operates nowadays, well, some things don't make sense, or at least are not compatible with the spirit of DeFi. So I would say currently the framework is basically, there is one. We don't know whether it applies or to what extent. We are trying to figure out what exactly DeFi is and what kind of definitions we should rely on to say, this is DeFi and it's regulated as such, this is CeFi and it's regulated as such. Can we keep the spectrum? It's unclear because obviously there's a lot of understanding and education to be achieved for the authorities, because the different protocols, how they are intertwined, how they are structured, it's not an easy thing to understand in terms of risk as well, like all the possible exploits. That's quite complex. So we are in a gray zone currently for DeFi, and some things will, I mean, for token issuances, Mika is great, and like there are exceptions that are perfectly reasonable that could be used by DeFi. In terms of authorization and registering as an crypto asset provider, this may be way trickier. So I'm quite looking forward to future developments, I would say.
I would like to add, I completely agree with what just been said, and I would like to add that Mika is actually a great start, because when you give a framework, even if it's not perfect, even if it doesn't cover everything, you are giving a framework and grounds where the ecosystem can start to grow. And the direct effect of that, when you are looking at the main regulation that happened from a French perspective, we got the ICO, AMF visa very early in the ecosystem in 2017. Hello. We got the PAC law that gave like some fiscal framework for the ecosystem. We got the PSAN law, which was the basis for Mika, and defined what is a crypto asset service provider. And the consequence of that is that Binance is in France, Circle is in France, and the ecosystem is coming to France and coming to Europe, because there's a huge opportunity happening, because the US decide to basically kill themselves out of the industry, which is okay for them and good for us, I guess. So obviously it's not perfect. Obviously it doesn't cover DeFi, but it's a good start. And that's what I wanted to share.
Yeah, Mona, if you can also share and some context for our newly arrived speaker. So you can start by presenting, like sharing more about yourself. And then the question is basically, what do you think about the current regulation? And we're focusing more on Mika, but you're definitely not obliged to do that.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Sorry for being late. Hope something wasn't changed on DeFi on my flight. Came right from the airport. My name is Lior. I'm a lawyer in the space. I'm an OG, started in crypto in 2010, basically. Wrote one of the first studies globally about theories of money. Then I was leading and working in a lot of enterprises in various directions. I saw how DeFi is developing, like other concepts in the field. First of all, I'm privileged to be here and privileged to take part in this phenomenon in this conference. Now I'm the legal officer counsel of Stake Capital Group, which includes Stake DAO in it, which is a layer 2 of Curve, LSD. And what I think about the DeFi regulation, I think it's an evolution. You know, it's part. I've seen it developing. I see the progress in Europe. I see the situation in the US that I'm not sure it's blurry, but this is their way to, like you said, it's their way to do this. But I do see the innovation growing and growing and growing, and the regulator, as always, is behind, and the distance is becoming greater and greater, which is a problem, but we can solve it from many directions, and I would love to speak about it later.
Thank you. And yeah, for the introduction and for the answer. And so my next question would be a bit more tricky. And okay, let's say that we need to regulate DeFi. So what would be the challenges with doing that? And basically, can we reuse some of the pre-existing laws, for example, that regulate traditional finance? Because, you know, you've heard of the same rules, same risk, same rules approach of regulators. So what do you think about that? What's your opinion?
Yeah, I can kick off on this because I feel pretty strongly about it. You know, when I look at this, I look at it from asset management point of view, which is probably one of the most heavy regulated spaces in traditional finance. And I have spent more hours than I care to admit reading through collective investment scheme law in lots of different jurisdictions. It makes for really, bad time spent, to be honest. But it teaches you a lot, and what it teaches you is that these laws are really not purpose-built for DeFi. Just to give like a really simple example, when you look at setting up a fund, pretty much anywhere in most places in the world, this is considered a collective investment scheme when you have more than 2 investors. And automatically that means any product you build that has more than 2 investors falls under that law. And by law, in most countries, you're required to have financial intermediaries by law, such as a custodian, such as a fund administrator, an independent auditor, etc. Now, I think hopefully everybody in this room and certainly on this panel understands that blockchain technology was designed to actually remove financial intermediaries and can automate their job, potentially, I would even argue, in a much more accurate and real-time way. So to go back to Yara's question, I absolutely don't think existing laws today are fit for purpose. And when I kind of look at the way the SEC is moving, that is exactly what they're trying to do, fitting kind of blockchain law, existing law onto blockchain, which actually ignores all the innovative parts of blockchain. And so if we really want to embrace the innovation and the benefits that this technology brings, I think we should take a step back and look at what are the goals that a regulator is trying to achieve when they write law. You know, I think generally speaking, like I kind of simplify a lot, it's generally speaking to protect investors. And if you're trying to protect investors, there are different considerations that you have to bear in mind. And just to give a few examples, you know, these are very high-level examples. You want to make sure that the code base is secure. You want to make sure that they understand the risks. You want to make sure that they understand the pros and cons. But you certainly don't want to force unnecessary friction, cost, and time, and lack of transparency just because that's what the law says. In the past, it was built for a paper-based system, not for a technology-enabled platform.
I completely agree with that, and I think that's why Europe took the right step. With MiCA, they took a step back and say, okay, we do not have the capability or the current understanding to understand what DeFi is. How do we define DeFi? So we're going to push something for the crypto asset service provider, and we're going to wait, and as Christine Lagarde say, we're going to do a MiCA 2 or MiCA 3 for these kind of actors. And I think that was the right approach and why Europe is winning right now where the US is losing, basically, on the ecosystem. And in terms of intermediary, I will more talk about interaction. And to me, it's important to push the narrative and the understanding with the regulator that there's several layers of interaction with DeFi. For example, you can interact directly with the smart contract of Aave, and some people are able to do that, but it's a bit less user-friendly to do that. Or you can go to aave.com, and the protocol is completely controlled by the DAO, and it's completely decentralized. But you can also go to app.aave.com, which is operated by the Aave companies, and that's an application. It's a different way to interact with the protocol. Or you can go to InstantApp, or you can deposit in Curve, and you will end up in Aave as well. But it's not the same thing, so it should be treated differently. Or you can just have some USDC, go to Binance Earn, or go to Ledger Live and deposit that, and maybe part of that those assets will end up in Aave, and it's a different interaction. And right now, we have clear regulation. If you deposit USDC on Binance, that's a crypto asset service provider. We have MiCA, so that's covered. Now, I think the next steps will be to define what is an application, what are the rules regarding application, and what is a protocol, and what are the rules regarding those protocols. And it's very important that those rules are different, because it's different kind of actors, different kind of audience, different kind of risk, and obviously regulation should be different for all these actors. And as part of ADAN, we are understanding and trying to push the message that regulation cannot have the same weight on a crypto service provider than on a totally decentralized protocol. So you have to balance regulation if you want the ecosystem to work.
Maybe building on what you both said, because this is exactly the case. We have to balance those traditional regulations that build on the role of an intermediary that's quite straightforward, that has control, you know exactly what they are doing, what they are in charge of, versus all these interactions where it becomes less clear who has the multisig, who is just the app, who is promoting the service. So all of this is all the contrary of what we can see in the traditional sector, and there's not enough transparency currently. Who has a clear vision when they end up on the app of which entity does what? What is the DAO handling? Who has the multisig? How is it structured? Usually this kind of information is not disclosed, or you need to really dig further to figure it out. So in terms of regulations, it also makes sense to bring more clarity on that for users, because this is how they will be protected. They will understand, okay, this is not controlled by anyone. This is controlled by this entity, so I can go against that entity if something happens, but only if this happened, not if something else happens, because it was fully automated. And there's no clarity on that, so people just keep targeting whatever name, whatever entity they find in DeFi, just because they want to have a point of contact when something happens. Each time there was a hack, when there were all the failures like the DPEGs and so on, when something happens, you want to be able to reach out. And in DeFi, even if it's not part of the spirit of it, like, oh, it's decentralized, there's a DAO, so we are all responsible for that. Well, human nature is such that you still want to address someone. And maybe this is what is missing currently, and regulation could help with that by either providing clarity, or I'm not sure it's a good idea, like forcing them to have a point of contact. But how do you do that with DAOs? This will be a huge debate.
Maybe to add one small point, all the things are true and right, but there is a gap of knowledge between the industry and the regulators, and the gap is wide. This industry, the knowledge in this industry is managed on Twitter and Discord, and then it erased, and then, you know, this is not how the regulator could learn and could develop regulation. So regulation is coming from somewhere, better not from court, because also court needs some knowledge and some profound knowledge. And unfortunately, I don't see how this gap is getting closed. So I just the French regulator was publishing the paper about DeFi, and when I read this paper, I see a great gap of knowledge. And as a person that works in the industry, it's a consultation. They ask you questions, but I cannot cooperate. I cannot discuss with them because the questions are not, first of all, professional, to my opinion. Second, they are looking for someone to give them something, which I would not be the one to give it. And so to create the regulation, there should be, I think nowadays, a different process, and the industry should push the regulation. S2 should push the knowledge, and not only on Twitter.
So yeah, I wanted to actually give you the word about, I'm assuming that you are talking about the ACPR consultation paper. So Mark, if you can provide us with some context so that the audience also knows what we're talking about, just a brief overview.
The ACPR and the AMF are like the regulatory part of the French state that handle like a financial asset in general. And basically France has the legal head start in the industry with all these previous law, and you know, Europe rock, usually you have like one state nation that push some regulation and it acts as a template for the European regulation. So basically these consultations are the basic, at least in my opinion, are the base work to produce reports that will like suggest regulation in France, but also at the European level. And it's probably what we, Christine Lagarde called Mika too. Probably not going to be the name, but yeah, it's a funny nickname. And well, to be honest, In my opinion, I agree that the report is not perfect, but we don't expect from a regulator to be perfect. We don't expect them to deploy the red carpet. It's not going to happen. But the thing is that if you don't reply, if you don't interact with regulators, somebody else will talk on your behalf. And I think it's important to recognize who are those other guys and what are the motivation for them and what they want to push and what is their vision for the crypto ecosystem. So I agree it's not perfect, but I think we should organize as an ecosystem to reply, educate, and push the dialogue in the direction that is more beneficial for ecosystem actors that truly believe in the ethos of decentralization. That's why France have ADAN. That's why there's the European Council, Blockchain for Europe association in so many countries, because we want to push the narrative forward for the ecosystem. And obviously the questions are based, but you don't have to reply to them. You can give your own answer, and that's basically what we did at ADAN. It's say, okay, this is your questionnaire, so we answer to the question, but also this is a document with our vision and our answer, and this is how we work. We have to keep dialoguing, because otherwise you let other people talk on your behalf, and I think that's a net negative.
Yeah, I agree with Mark, and actually I had a question for Lior, like what is, in your mind, the downside of responding to a paper like that? You know, you said they want a direction and I'm not willing to give them that direction. Why not? I mean...
No, okay, so not that I'm not willing, but first of all, exposure. Exposure of people that work in the DeFi. If it's a DAO and you know the situation of DAOs are not totally decentralized. So first of all, it's exposure. And then the power of your negotiation. It's not always there. Then I guess it's also to give knowledge in a certain way. So for example, you can read some stuff in the academy, maybe some people wrote some things, maybe you have some answers around. You don't need to come to me as a DeFi leader and to ask me directly, expose me directly. You can do one more step forward. That was my feeling.
I think we are plainly on the radar of regulators. So the time of innocence for the ecosystem to say, let's stay small and they will not regulate us, it's gone. Yeah, we're gonna have regulation anyway, so now it's time to try to push for the better size of regulation. At least it's my opinion.
And especially you mentioned academia. I mean, it's practice that matters here. Like academia has also like an external point of view on things. Sometimes they reach out to protocols and manage to get information, but what really matters is how things operate in practice. So they need to reach out to practitioners on that and like to specific projects. But what I think about is also, are they ready to hear the answers? Because when I just think about the reaction when you present how things work, even students told me once this is like a parallel universe. And is the regulator ready to have an open mind and just wonder, okay, how do we regulate this parallel universe that is so different from how we are used to conceive things? And there's also the education of users, because the less users are educated, the more they push for protection, because like, oh, I'm getting into something that's like a stormy water, please protect us. So there's also a big part about educating and being transparent to users, so they stop pushing for protection against something that appears to be this big monster that could give you a lot of money or take a lot of money from you.
Yeah, thank you for this great discussion. And I think a question that is kind of formulating in my head right now is, okay, what can we do? As obviously, yes, we can form organizations such as the UCI, such as ADAN in France, but how do you consider your role? Like, there are lawyers here, there are people from the industry. So have you thought about, okay, what I can do? And if you can elaborate as well, if anyone wants to kind of.
Well, I would say by saying translation, because since it's so different, I would say lawyers, maybe you agree, we have this role of translating what the client says to us, like the project explains, that will sound extremely crazy if we present it to the regulator, into a terminology and a way of phrasing that is still correct, but may seem a bit more acceptable. And it also allows people to understand clarity. Like a lot of things are so technical, if you just put them out there, we always say, all the information is available. But there's a lot of translation to do that because it's not plain language.
Yeah, on my side, it's educating and giving like opinion of and real world situation from ecosystem actor. My first meeting with the IMF was in 2016 when I was working at Consensus, and since then I met multiple times like French regulators and the government to basically share knowledge, because I have the feeling that the more they know, the more they understand, the higher the chance that we end up with regulation that makes sense. And so far in France, I think it pays off, because we got some regulation and we were the first country to do so, like in Europe, that makes some sense. Are things perfect? Obviously no. Things can be better, for sure. But step by step, it's a long journey. I think we are getting there.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that from a perspective, I think, you know, there's like these much larger protocols like Aave, Uniswap, Compound, etc., that have much more resources to throw at these kind of things. But there's also a lot of, I would say the majority of DeFi projects are small to medium. And it's probably hard to imagine how to find the time and the resources to spend on topics like these. So I think really thinking about, you know, easier ways to be a part, play a part in the industry voice, like joining an association. You know, there's EUCI, what is it, ADAN? I always forget the ADAN. I think it's ADAN, and there's MAMA in Switzerland, like joining your local association. Usually they are tiered just to be favorable for smaller sized companies. And using that as your representation, you know, and pooling your resources in some respect to get your representation through an association is really key. I think also making sure that we are putting the right people in DeFi representatives in front of regulators, you know, that they are able to speak the same language, able to translate, but also reflect the benefits is key as well.
Yeah, I agree. Everything is correct. To me, along the years, it was several vectors that I took. So sometimes it was the academy. So I thought in the academy courses about blockchain, I pushed those courses. It's not like the academy was waiting for me to teach it. Writing articles in the academy, which is also complicated, because then you need to be in the academy, and those people, you know, still ask you, like two weeks ago, some professor asked me, but tell me, crypto is used to only for criminal things, and this is like the University of Jerusalem, hi professor. Anyway, it's hard. And translating is a major thing. I'm doing this for the last decade, translating, and the gap is big. Like when, for example, when I see terms like DAO, terms like decentralization, it sounds simple, it's not, totally not. And when you go to the industry, it has many variations, many different kinds of I don't know, being there, and that's a major work to do. And of course, speaking with the regulator wherever and whenever you can. But I saw those opportunities in 2016-17. Now, much less. I don't know why.
Yeah, thank you for your answers. They really resonate with me. And while we were talking, I just remembered how I gave a talk in front of lawyers, like from different countries, and about crypto regulation. And at the end of the talk, there was only one question, and the question was, okay, why do we need crypto when we have money? And in this case, I wasn't even sure where to begin. Which is also somewhat related to my next question, which is, we sometimes, when we talk about crypto regulation and DeFi regulation, almost, it seems like almost it's like a monolith term, which isn't the case when it comes to regulation, because we have the European Union, that is also not one thing, it's 27 countries. We have obviously the United States, that is also not one thing. So how do we harmonize this, and what would be the issues, and maybe what would be like the shortcuts of doing that, or even if it's even possible? So maybe.
Should I then start? I feel like I'm the designated person to start. It's a tough question because harmonizing that, well, there's not a lot of fields that are extremely harmonized in law. You can try for the union, you can try for some conventions, treaties, but I'm not sure there'll be any crypto treaty anytime soon. So harmonization, I don't think we will reach it at any point. Everyone will have their own approach. It will put a lot of pressure on any rules that are like the reverse solicitation and equivalent, because it will all be about, okay, which markets are you actually addressing? I'm not sure it answers completely the question, but if it's like, what's the approach to this international beast that has no borders? Well, laws have borders. It will just be, you have to fine-tune which borders are you actually crossing. I mean, de facto, you'll have users everywhere, but that's the case for most of the even traditional businesses nowadays. I can go on any website and order something. I can access any protocol and use it as well. So I'm not sure this is a bigger problem because it's not specific to crypto. We'll just need to find ways of tackling, okay, when something happens, which regulations do we apply? And for now, there's not many protocols with terms of use defining which law is applicable to them. So maybe this is a first step to at least have terms of use, but then who publishes them, if you have a DAO? So maybe these kind of questions, which are very pragmatic, are the answer, rather than having those big discussions regarding which regulation and how do we harmonize that. At least have some regulations in the different jurisdictions. Maybe, I mean, it will be impossible to force all the countries to have a regulation, because if we need to make all the process of educating and translating to all the regulators in the world, we're really not getting there. So at least have enough jurisdictions so that these projects know they can implement their project there.
As I said before, the good thing with Europe is that there's many countries involved. And what I want to share is that try to fight for local victory, because you increase the odds for a global victory. I have the feeling, obviously I'm biased as a French, that the PSAN law was a good template for the MiGA regulation, and a local victory led to something that pushed the needle forward globally for Europe. So if we manage to have a few good regulation each state within Europe, that is not useless at all, because it helps the whole continent globally, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I fully agree with Mark, and maybe just to take a second to make a side comment on CeFi for a second as well. I think what's happening in the US now is really, really important to the future of crypto, whether it's DeFi or CeFi. And even though it's not directly impacting DeFi, I think, you know, this Coinbase thing, it's really important to get behind that, I think, and support what's happening there in any way you can, if you're based in the US or you have exposure to the US, because it really sets the precedent, I think, of what's to come. And I think the thing that concerns me the most about it is that it's killing the idea for innovation. I would also, you know, whether you agree with me or not, it's kind of a fact that when the US, you know, imposed FATCA, the rest of the world followed. And there is a dangerous precedent here that, you know, if, you know, Coinbase doesn't come out on top, that the rest of the world follows. So I think it's really key to put, you know, to kind of unify as an industry, regardless of CeFi or DeFi at this point in time. I also just want to share an anecdote which supports something Mark said earlier about if we don't speak up, other people will. I think it was 2017, I was invited to a meeting to kind of discuss blockchain with the heads of banks, all the Swiss banks. It was an interesting meeting. At the end of the presentation, they all understood the disruptive qualities of blockchain. One of I'm not going to name which one, but one of the Swiss bank CEOs in the room said to me, I said to everyone, we're very aware of the disruptive qualities of blockchain, and we're very aware of the friction and compliance aspects that old finance has today. That's our business model. We don't want that friction to go away because that's where we make all our margins. And only large banks can make those margins and afford all of those operational setup. With blockchain automation, that goes away. That simple anecdote tells you why you should be speaking up, why everybody should be having a voice in this industry, because if you don't make any mistake, big banks and big asset managers, they know that it's impossible to compete with them because they have the scale that required to have these operational and administrative processes, which blockchain is there to disrupt. They're very aware of it, and they don't want that to happen.
Thank you for this. Yeah, Lior, if you have something to add.
Yeah, just first of all, I see people from traditional finance coming into the DeFi space, and I think it will contribute a lot of knowledge and fulfill the gaps. Practically, what you do, because harmony is hard to achieve, globalization is happening here, and it's I think one of the first times that the globalization is very, very important. Practically, what you do today, just to share my knowledge, is a game of risk. So everything is a risk. We just measure the risk. So multi-jurisdiction is always a risk. Every enterprise see it, and what we do is risk and calculating the money and the costs of it. So normally it will be few countries in Europe, a bit of US, and that's how in practice you manage this risk until there will be harmony and peace all over the world, etc., etc.
Sounds beautiful. Let's see if that's what's gonna end up with the world. But now we have a few minutes for questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, raise a hand. Otherwise, I'll continue with my questions. So you're warned. Okay, I'll continue with my questions then. So to be a bit blunt, oh, there's one question. Okay, maybe I was ignoring it, sorry.
We can do one quick question, then we'll unfortunately kind of running behind the schedule.
Hi, thanks for the panel. How much of this whole regulatory argument, I know some of it is we need to argue for specific financial regulations, and then I think there's the flip side of arguing that privacy is a right, or the right to gamble away our money on shitcoins is, we should be allowed to do that. Should we be fighting on both fronts? And I feel like a lot of the discussion is more, the larger players arguing nuances over which, securities regulations we have to sort of apply.
It's a very, very good question. And it's definitely about balance between more regulation and more right to privacy. And there's definitely an opposing force. And I'm quite not happy about the fact that we are completely losing on the privacy front. Basically everything that happened in the crypto ecosystem for the past few years was defeat upon defeat on privacy front. Basically, Tornado Cash is a huge issue in the ecosystem, and Ethereum itself, in terms of architecture, is terrible for privacy. And unfortunately, there's not enough effort in the ecosystem on that side of things, and that's something I regret deeply.
I'm just going to add something. It also depends on the jurisdiction and how they are pushing for consumer protection. It's more like a philosophical question on the different jurisdictions. If you want to gamble your money away, well, in some jurisdictions you could do it potentially with utility tokens. So we need to solve the first question of, is it a security or not? And then, for example, in Switzerland, if it's a utility token, well, you're free to do whatever you want. And if you want to spend millions and lose them potentially, you're free to do it. We will not push for extreme regulations for something that's supposed to just give you access to a service. I always give the example of, if you buy 10 watches and you want to sell them for more than you bought them, well, they were not meant to be an investment, so you're kind of free to do that, and if you lose, well, it's too bad for you. Well, it's the same for utility tokens. So it really depends on the mindset of the jurisdiction, and historically, I would say like the EU and the US are more protective. So this is maybe also why they're pushing forward all this debate about securities. It's like, we need to protect the consumer, we need to protect the investor. It may be a bit less in other jurisdictions.
Thank you, yeah. We're out of time, thank you. You can find us roaming around if you want to discuss, continue this discussion. And thanks to the panelists for the great conversation. And yeah, thank you.